Hey, welcome back. This is session 2 for the Windows Phone 7 Unleashed presentation. And in this presentation, or in this section of the Windows Phone 7 Unleashed, we're going to talk about a few of these topics. Navigation, the basics of navigation through the Windows Phone application. We'll go ahead and touch on web services, the different types of web services you can use, the ones we're going to use in our applications. We'll talk about push notifications. We'll go through the process and how that works. And then we'll talk about some trial applications and how you implement that inside a Windows Phone application. So let's go ahead and get started. So if you think of a traditional web application, you have the host of the application, which is the browser that will host your web application. Next comes your actual application that you deploy to the server, which is then accessed through the web browser. Inside of your web application, your mysite.com, you have HTML pages, and when you have an HTML page, you populate it with content, whether it's controls or text boxes or labels, or in the case of Silverlight, animations and storyboards and all that type of stuff. Now, the way a phone application works is exactly the same. You have the host, which is your phone itself with your standard back, home, and search buttons. The application or ZAP file, which is deployed to the phone. The pages themselves, which again are Silverlight, and you navigate through them. And inside your pages, you have the content, the controls, the text boxes, the labels, what your application does. So you have a very similar type of application that you do when you have a web application. Now the difference, or slight difference, which we touched on in the first session, is that you can have both an XNA game or a Silverlight application. So they're both written in C#, but on the front end you either have XNA if you're developing games and you're really looking to get that nice 3D functionality and game loops and all that fun stuff in XNA, or Silverlight on the front end. You can interchange them a bit. What I mean by that is you could possibly write an application in XNA, or you can write a game in Silverlight, but for the most part it's going to split down the middle. Games will be written in XNA, applications will be written in Silverlight. Now, in Silverlight itself, you will be utilizing some of the XNA framework. Now, in a Silverlight application, you cannot pull in any of the any of the XNA stuff that has to do with 3D rendering and any visualizations, but you will be utilizing it for things like the microphone. So the stack that you utilize to capture the audio from the microphone is in the XNA stack. Or if in your application you want to pull their gamer stats and stuff, you can pull in the DLLs for XNA into your application. So beyond that, it's very, very similar to a web application. So as we spoke about in the first session, there are several hardware buttons that are standard as part of the phone. So 3 of them will always be in the same place, and that is the back button, the home button or start button, which is the Windows icon, and the search button. The search button is a contextual search, and the back button is used for navigation through the phone and through your application. There's a couple other standard buttons as well: volume, camera, and of course on and off. So those are the standardized buttons on the phone itself. The system defines all of the actions for them. So that means you cannot override any of the actions for the button. The back button you can override for, but there's specifications on what you should and possibly at time of release can override the back button for, and we will talk about that. So the back button performs 2 key tasks in Windows Phone 7. It returns to the previous place on the stack, or dismisses this misses a pop-up UI. Those are the only two things you should utilize the back button for. When a user utilizes the back button, you want to make sure that, and the reason you should only utilize it for these two things is because the way the phone works is users will be comfortable with how the phone works and how the applications work, meaning they will have an expectation of what's going to happen when you hit the back button. If you remember in 6.5 and below, you didn't always know what the buttons were going to do. They didn't always function exactly how you would expect them to function. So you want to make sure you do not override the back button to perform other actions besides the two that I mentioned. Now, this is not enforced right now in the beta tools. This may be enforced in future updates. Now, the only exception is games. So the back button can be used to pause or show a pause menu when the user hits back in an XNA game, because that's part of the experience that they're expecting. Okay, so let's go ahead and I want to do two things: show you how simple navigation is and talk about the on-navigated to override. I'm going to go ahead and just create a new page. Add a new item, add a Windows Phone portrait page. And we can talk about that as well. So the Windows Phone application will automatically handle orientation for you out of the box and by default, which is different than the original versions of the tools. You'll see that you can set the orientation to whatever you want to support. So if you choose a portrait supported orientation, it is not going to rotate when you turn the phone or turn the emulator. If you wanted to get it to rotate, you can choose landscape, which would stick it at landscape, or portrait in landscape, which would allow it to go back and forth. We're going to just keep it at portrait for this presentation. Now you can see I have a main page and a page 1. I'm going to go ahead and go to main page, and we will go ahead and add some functionality to this page. Now, to keep with the theme of not creating any extra navigation, I'm going to use the generic menu or application bar menu that we saw and created, or quite honestly just uncommented in our last session. I'm going to go ahead and change the text to go to next page. And then I also want to work with one of the events. So while I have that highlighted, I'm going to go ahead and click on the menu item in the XAML. You can see that I have both properties and events. If I click on events, just like you can in other Visual Studios, it'll application types, you can see that it has a list of events for this type of control. For this one, obviously, there's only one. There's a click event. I'm going to go ahead and double click here, and it's going to go ahead and create a menu item 1 click event for me. So inside of the menu 1 click event, I'm going to go ahead and navigate to that second page. So let's say I wanted to send some type of data to that second page as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a URI, call it nav. I'll make it equal to new URI, and I'm going to pass it where I want to go to, which is, let's see what I called that again. I think I called it, it's just page1.xaml. I need to also pass it some data. So I'm going to, just like you do in HTML, I'm going to pass it a query string of ID is equal to 5. For this example, it really doesn't matter. I could also, just like you would normally do, I could also do selected .id.toString. If I'm dynamically passing data, obviously whatever variable holds that, I can pass that here. I'm just going to simply put it right in here. I need to then tell it what URI kind I'm doing. URI kind is relative because I am internal in my application. And then I'm going to use the navigation service to navigate over to the next page. So I'll do navigate service, .navigate, and I'm going to pass it that URI. So you can do this all in one string. I went ahead and separated it out to make it clear. And that's going to take us to the next page when the user clicks on this. Now you'll want to do some conditioning to obviously make sure that the ID exists before you pass it over. Put some error catching, all that stuff you normally do in an application here. But it's relatively simple to navigate to the next page. So let's go ahead and go to page 1. And we're going to go to code behind of it. And I'm going to go ahead and override something on this page. So I'm going to do protected, override, unnavigated to. And when I hit tab there, it's going to completely fill it out for me. And this is a very important method to override. You're going to be overriding the unnavigated to and unnavigated from methods quite a bit when you're writing phone applications. And the reason for this is we talked about a little bit about the application lifecycle. We'll talk about it in more detail, but you need to worry about saving state and passing information so you know when someone navigates away from your page, they could possibly be navigating outside of your application. And so you need to know when they're navigating so you can save state to make sure that when they return to your application, you can restore that state. Now I'll go into the application life cycle in a little more detail a little bit later, but remember the two overrides that you're going to be concentrating on, the unnavigated to and the unnavigated from. For this example, we're going to simply grab the information that's being sent over from the previous page. So I'm just going to declare a string is equal to, I could do string.empty or whatever, is equal to that, and I'm going to do if navigation context query string try get value ID. It's going to be out variable search. I'm going to send it to the variable we just created. Then I can then use that variable to look something up. I can create a method called query that passes that variable, and we're all set. So you can see it's just like you would in a regular Windows or ASP.NET application. Passing data you can do through query strings. In your hands-on lab, we're going to go a step further and show you how to serialize objects that you can retrieve unnavigated to, but this is a way to simply pass IDs over for you to then grab the information from the ID. Now, with query string, you can see that I'm just doing a very simple try get value. If you have multiple query strings, You can work with the query string collection and then loop through the query strings just like you do in a web application. So navigation is very simple. Okay, let's go ahead and move back to the presentation. So next we're going to talk about connecting web services. And this was an interesting part of this whole day because there are many parts of a Windows Phone application that really don't have to do with Windows Phone and could also consume a whole day all by themselves. And this is definitely one of them. This is going to be something you're spending a lot of time on when you're developing a Windows Phone application because, like we said earlier, you want to utilize web services to give your application an extra functionality. So in this world, you want to kind of shift your mindset and how you develop an application. You've probably heard the 3 screens in the cloud. And what that means is you want to be able to create applications that can be utilized in many different places. So you want to be forward-looking. How can I use what I'm creating today in different places? So on the XNA side, it's really easy to create a game that works on the PC, a game that works on the Xbox, and a game that works on the phone. So you can utilize that and charge for it in multiple places. Same thing for Silverlight. You can have Silverlight on the phone, Silverlight on the desktop, and Silverlight in the browser. So with minor modifications, you can have your application working in all 3 places. And that's what I mean by be forward-looking when you're working in this context. And web services is a big part of that. So there's lots of ways that you can connect using a Windows Phone. WCF, of course, but WCF, you can just use simple or basic HTTP binding. There's no duplex, custom WCF bindings for WCF. You can have, and actually to create that is the same way you would normally create it. You can use HTTP web request. You can use web client, which is what we're going to use. And it's important to note there's no cross-domain policy file required because Silverlight on the phone is Silverlight 3. It's a subset and a superset of Silverlight, meaning that it's a subset because everything you can do on a normal PC, you obviously can't do all of that on the phone. And it's a superset because there's certain things you can do on the phone that you can't do on a PC. So it's essentially Silverlight 3. But it is Silverlight out of the browser, which means you do not need a cross-domain policy file. And then finally, OData. In OData, there's quite a few places utilizing AtomPub and have published OData support for their web services. And if you utilize OData, you can utilize all the great tools built into Visual Studio to connect to those services and write your code based on those services. There's no support for sockets. We already talked about custom WCF bindings for RIA services and NTLM authentication on the phone. So those are important to know. So here's an example of a simple web request, and one of the reasons I'm showing you this is because we're going to be implementing a very simple type of web request for our application today. And we've done this on purpose. You can, after today, enhance how you connect to whatever service you want to do when you're on your own time. If you already have your own service, a WCF service you can utilize, fantastic. If you want to create an Azure web service, one of the great things about that is obviously you can host WCF in a worker role, but I'm not sure if you know, but in SQL Azure, it will automatically, if you utilize SQL Azure, give you endpoints for OData support utilizing just SQL Azure. So you can go that route. One of the reasons we chose just a very simple connection to a service is because we want to show you how to connect to a really basic REST web service do it in a way that you understand what you're doing, and to give you an easy way to connect when you're building your application later. So we're going to be using this method in our application. Connecting to a WCF ASMX server is simple, just like you do add service reference for a regular application. You do the same thing for the phone. Again, the only difference is you have to use basic HTTP binding, but then this will obviously create the proxy that allows you to utilize the objects that the web services has given you. Obviously, I don't think I mentioned on the last page, you can also utilize SOAP to gather information from your service as well. Many different ways. We're going to be focusing on RESTful web services. Again, I already talked about the fact that you can have it as a web role, and you can retrieve data in two ways, XML or JSON. We're going to use XML in our application just so we can easily use link to XML and parse out the data for use in our application. If you want to find out who publishes OData and you want to utilize the OData client library for Windows Phone 7, all you have to do is go to odata.org to do that, and they'll give you a list of everyone that publishes there, and it's an easy way to grab data for Windows Phone 7. So you really get to decide. And this is by no means a fully fleshed out test, but just doing a simple test, downloading 8 data records. Each record only had 4 fields. The bytes that were transferred were measured. Using OData version from WCF Data Services, there were 8.5K. Using ASMX SOAP and a data set, it's 3K. Using REST and XML, as we're using, is 1.2K. And then REST and JSON is only 639 bytes. So it's important for you to understand how much is coming down over the wire, because that will affect your application and how responsive it is and how quickly you can get data down to the phone. So you get to decide. As I said, we're going to be using REST and XML in our application. In addition, you want to have applications that are aware when they're connected and when they're not connected. And to do that, for Windows Phone 7, use network interface type to determine what type of network connection you have. And you can listen to the network change event so that when that fires, you know when you have connectivity and you do not have connectivity, and respond accordingly in your application. Okay, before we go into push notifications, let's go ahead and look at a very simple application. It's called TweetView, and all it does, we've placed a text box and a button on top of this page, and when we click on the button, it's going to look up the tweets of a particular person. And the reason I'm showing you this is because it's very similar to what we're going to be doing in Hands-On Labs, so you understand it as you're walking through it. Now, most of the code you'll see is in the code behind page here. And that is going to be the same for our application as well. Now, eventually I'm going to be creating a .NET wrapper that wraps the calls to the Wine.com functionality, just like if you've ever used TweetSharp, which is an open source project on CodePlex to do any functionality associated with Twitter. It wraps all the Twitter REST calls in a nice wrapper. You would obviously do the same. For the length of time of this presentation and this day, we're not going to do that. We have a very simple class called Tweet, and the class called Tweet just is a class that will allow us to place what we get back on XML into properties for the avatar, for the title, for the author, and for the time published. So we have one class called Tweet. And then inside of the main page, code behind, you can see when I double-clicked on the button, it's going to take whatever I typed into the box and send it to this method called query. This would be the name of someone on Twitter, like myself, at Daniel Egan. It will go ahead and look up my tweets. If we go up to query, we're passing the value in here, And here is where we're simply instantiating a web client, newing it up, and then we are going and setting a download completed string. So we are doing this asynchronously, so when the information that we're requesting returns from Twitter, it's going to automatically go to this method, which we'll look at in a second. We're going to then utilize the Twitter API, the REST API, and pass it a new URI of api.twitter.com. This is the REST API functionality for checking statuses of a user's timeline. You can see screen name is equal to wrapping it in a URI encode and the value here. That's going to send a REST request to Twitter, and then when it returns, it's going to go to this tweets method. If we go to this tweets method, you can see that all we're doing is taking the result that's coming back, and we chose to use XML coming back. You can also choose, like most REST services, you can also choose JSON. We're choosing XML, and we're putting it as a variable called XML. Then we're going to loop through each element in here and create a new tweet object. And finally, we have a list. So we're going to go ahead and set the value in here. And then finally, we have a list on the page called results. And so we're going to add to the list collection results.items.add and add the tweet there. If we go ahead and look at the XAML on the page, because we're going to be doing it the same way here, you can see on that list we have an item template and a datum template. And within here, inside the stack panel, we have text blocks. And so we're binding to title, published, and author. And since we've loaded this list box with objects that have title, published, and author, it will bind those things to these text blocks and show it on the screen. Let me go ahead and I guess run this quickly so you can see how this works. Since we already have the emulator open from last session, this will come up quickly. There's our splash screen. I'll do at Daniel Egan. I'm going to hit again pause break to get rid of that keyboard. Go ahead and do click on lookup. You'll notice that I didn't put at Daniel Egan, I just put Daniel Egan. And it downloads both my avatar, my name, the tweets that I've just done. And you'll also notice that you have flick and pan in this list out of the box for you. So you don't need to implement anything to do flick and pan. If you have a multi-touch laptop, you can actually work with the multi-touch in the emulator as well. I don't have that. So that's how that works. And we're going to do something very similar in the hands-on lab. Okay, let's go ahead and move on and talk about push notifications. Okay. So as I discussed in the first part of this course, live tiles are a very unique feature to Windows Phone 7 and something that you're going to want to take advantage of. And to take advantage of that, you have to understand push notifications for the phone. And so let's go ahead and just go over the data flow of how they work so you understand how possibly easy it is. So you build an app that wants to do push notifications to the phone. You either want to push simple stuff like a toast notification. You can push in-app information. You can also push new live tiles to your application as well. So as an application, you have to register or open a push channel with our service. What that does is gives you a unique URI. It creates a GUID that's unique to the phone and application itself, so it knows the exact phone to send it to. Your application takes this and sends it to your service. Now this is the important part, your service. If push notifications are easy to implement if you already have a service already, meaning that all you need to do is add extra functionality to your service. When an event happens on your service, you take whatever happens in that event. Our example earlier was a car application that when the search found the type of car I was looking for, an event would fire. When that event fires, it's going to push and send data to the URI that I've been given for that application. The URI is holding a payload. It's an XML payload that just holds simple text information that allows you to send a quick note, send some simple data, set a new tile. It's going to send it to our push service, which sends it to the push client, which then sends it to the app. And again, you can send toast or tile or just data to the app. So the way push notifications work is simple as long as you already have your service built. If not, whatever you want your service to do, you have to build that. Now, one of the things that I will say, and one of the things they've added is if you want to send and change your tiles on your application but don't want to build a service, you can also, through our notification services, just set up a timed tile release, meaning that it'll automatically loop through tiles that you set up on a timed basis that you set up. So if the goal is just to make your tile change to drive people into your app, you do not need to have a service to utilize that. But again, you can push notifications to a toast, which will pop up on the bottom, or I'm sorry, on the top of the phone and come down. If they click on the toast, it'll launch your application. You can push the tiles, or you can push messages into the application itself if they have it open. Okay, finally, let's talk about the trial API. I get this question all the time, and the trial API is absolutely the simplest thing in the world. Meaning that since we own the marketplace, you do not have to have two separate code bases for a trial application versus a real application, because all you need to implement inside of your code is a simple if statement. If current license is trial, do this. If it's not, do that. Meaning, you can have it time bomb. The first time they use your application, you can set in isolated storage a timestamp, and just keep checking off that timestamp, and when it hits 30 days, the trial's over. You can set a level, so if they try to get to a level and they're under trial, you use this if statement to stop that. You can have a per use, meaning you keep track of how many times they use it if it's trial, and stop them if they go over the allotted time. You say you can use it 12 times and then you can't use it anymore. So it's as easy as that. It's really simple. There's some other launchers and choosers, which we'll look at when we look at launchers and choosers in the third session, that allow you to then, within this if statement, launch a screen that allows them to buy your application. And again, all that is made possible because we have one marketplace that we're utilizing, so we can control how things work. For the user, as long as you implement try versus buy, it's easy for them to try, upgrade, and utilize your application. Studies show that utilizing a trial for your application increases sales by about 30%. So this is definitely something you want to implement in your application if it's not going to be completely free already. So
that's it for Session 2 for Windows Phone 7 Unleashed. My name is Daniel Egan. Please go through the hands-on labs that you will find right below this video. Thanks.